Have you ever wondered why the man who tries the least is always the one who gets the most? Think about it for a moment. At some point in your life, you've surely seen that guy. He's not necessarily the best looking, the tallest, or the one with the most expensive car. But there's something about him you can't quite define. Something that makes people listen when he speaks, that makes conversations stop when he walks into a room, that makes women look at him without him having done a single thing to draw attention. And you, perhaps without even realizing it, have asked yourself what that man has that you don't. And the most unsettling part of all is that you probably already know the answer. You've been carrying it inside for a long time, buried under layers of beliefs that someone placed on top of you without ever asking your permission. Your family, school, the romantic movies that taught you love is one with flowers and pretty words. The songs that told you surrendering to another person is the highest expression of affection. An entire system of ideas built around a colossal lie that nobody warned you was a lie. And that lie has consequences. It has had them in your life. It is having them right now, even if you can't see it yet. Because there is something nobody explained to you when you were young. Something most men discover far too late, if they ever discover it at all. Attraction does not work the way you were told. It doesn't arise from excessive kindness. It doesn't come from constant messages or from always being available. It doesn't appear when you show how much you care about someone by being completely predictable, completely transparent, completely dependent on their approval to feel good about yourself. Attraction, that primitive and deeply psychological force, arises from something entirely different. And today, we are going to dismantle everything you thought you knew about it. The Stoic philosopher Epictetus taught, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters, and how you react to the possibility of connection, whether you rush toward it with desperate need or approach it with calm presence, is what will determine whether attraction grows or withers." Before we go on, I want you to understand something. This is not a video about conquest techniques. I'm not going to teach you lines to repeat or cheap tricks to use, as if human relationships were a video game with cheat codes. What I'm going to share with you today goes much deeper than that. It has to do with psychology, with neuroscience, with the way the human brain processes reality and makes emotional decisions without us being aware of it. It has to do with who you are at the most fundamental level, not with what you do or what you say. So, if you're looking for shortcuts, this probably isn't the place for you. But if something inside you has been feeling lost for a while, if there's a part of you that suspects something doesn't fit but can't quite figure out what, then stay. Because what comes next could change the way you see yourself forever. The Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts." When your thoughts are colored by the need for validation, your soul reflects that. You become anxious, reactive, and easily controlled. But when your thoughts are colored by self-respect and purpose, your soul reflects that too. You become grounded, present, and magnetic. And that magnetism is what draws others to you without effort. Let's start with something uncomfortable. Most men have been raised to believe that being a good person guarantees being chosen. That if you show enough affection, if you prove you're reliable and caring, if you make yourself indispensable in someone else's life, the natural result will be recognition and attraction. It's a logic that makes sense on paper. It's generous. It's fair. It's emotionally intelligent in theory. The problem is that the human brain does not operate on logic when it comes to attraction. Attraction is not a rational decision. It is an emotional and physiological response that occurs in the oldest layers of the brain, in structures that have been operating according to their own rules for millions of years, completely indifferent to the moral standards or values we consciously choose to adopt. The limbic system, which is the region of the brain responsible for processing emotions and instinctive responses, does not distinguish between what we should desire and what we actually desire. It simply reacts, and that reaction is guided by signals coming from the other person. Signals that communicate something very specific. And what do those signals communicate? Security, stability, self-control, the capacity to remain intact under pressure, the sense that this person knows who they are, regardless of what the world around them thinks. These are the signals that activate the brain's attraction system. Not gifts, not promises, not permanent availability. And here comes the first moment where this gets truly unsettling. When a man acts from a place of need, when his actions are motivated primarily by the desire for approval, the other person's brain detects it. Not consciously, but through micro-signals it processes automatically. The tone of voice that becomes slightly higher when there's tension, the posture that shrinks when the expected response doesn't come, the speed with which he replies to messages, the way he adjusts his opinions to avoid conflict. Each of these behaviors, seemingly small and insignificant, is sending a crystal-clear message to the observing brain. This man is not enough on his own, and that message changes everything. Seneca wrote, "It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste a lot of it. And one of the greatest wastes is the time we spend trying to be what others want us to be instead of discovering who we truly are. When you chase approval, you are wasting your energy on something that will never satisfy you because it is never enough. But when you build yourself, you create something that no one can take away." The neuroscience of attachment has shown us something fascinating in recent years. Human beings are programmed to feel attracted to what we perceive as scarce and valuable. It's a survival mechanism that evolved over thousands of years and that operates in exactly the same way today, even though the context has changed radically. When something is always available, when we can access it at any moment without any effort, the brain automatically assigns it a lower value. Not because we are cruel or unfair, but because that is how the economy of desire works at the neurological level. Now apply that principle to relationships. When a man is permanently available, when he responds instantly, when he reorganizes his entire schedule around another person's plans, when he makes that person the absolute center of his emotional universe, he is sending an unequivocal signal: I have nothing more important than you. And although that sounds romantic in a movie, in reality, it produces the opposite of the intended effect because the brain of the person receiving all that attention unconsciously interprets, if this man has nothing more important than me, what kind of man is he really? This is not a cruelty of the universe. It is evolutionary psychology acting exactly as it was designed to. And here is where the script you were given your whole life begins to fall apart. At some point in your life, you've probably lived this situation. You met someone who seemed incredible. You felt like you had finally found something real, and you gave yourself to it with all the honesty you were capable of. You were attentive. You were generous. You did everything you're supposed to do. And yet, at some point in the process, you noticed something changing, that the other person's interest started cooling in inverse proportion to the intensity with which you were getting closer. The more you gave, the less you seemed to receive. And you didn't understand why. Because in theory, you were doing everything right. What nobody explained to you is that you were operating with the wrong map. The map you were given says that love is earned through sacrifice and constant demonstration. But the real territory of attraction operates according to completely different rules. And as long as you keep using the wrong map to navigate the real territory, you will keep arriving at the same places you never wanted to reach. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." Realize this, and you will find strength. When you realize that you have been using the wrong map, you can begin to create a new one. You can begin to understand the real territory of attraction. And that understanding is the first step toward freedom. So, what is the right map? What is it that truly generates sustained attraction in another person? To answer that, we need to talk about something psychologists have been studying for decades, something with a technical name but a profoundly practical implication: attachment theory. John Bowlby, the British psychiatrist who developed this theory in the second half of the 20th century, discovered that the relational patterns we develop in childhood configure, in an almost determining way, how we bond with other people throughout our adult lives. And what he found when examining those patterns was something that should make us reflect deeply. Individuals who in childhood developed what is known as secure attachment, meaning those who grew up certain that their emotional needs would be met in a consistent and predictable manner, develop in adulthood a capacity to relate from a place of abundance rather than scarcity. They don't need the other person to complete them because they don't feel that anything fundamental is missing. They don't desperately seek external validation because they have an internal source of security that doesn't depend on what the environment gives back to them. And that, paradoxically, makes them enormously attractive. Because they transmit exactly the signals that the human brain's attraction system is instinctively looking for: They transmit stability. They transmit that they know who they are. They transmit that they can give without needing to receive in return in order to feel good. Epictetus taught, "No great thing is created suddenly, and secure attachment is not created suddenly. It is built through the accumulation of small acts of trust, small moments of self-awareness, small choices to be present rather than reactive. And as you build it, you become more attractive, not because you are trying, but because you are becoming whole." Now, here comes something crucial that I want you to listen to carefully because it completely changes the narrative. Not everyone was born with that kind of attachment. Most of us carry relational patterns that at some point were functional for emotionally surviving the environment in which we grew up, but that today limit us in ways we don't always know how to identify. Anxious attachment, for example, characterized by that constant need for confirmation and that feeling that the other person could leave at any moment, is not a character flaw. It is an adaptation, a response that the nervous system developed in reaction to an emotionally inconsistent or unpredictable environment. The problem is not where that pattern comes from. The problem is what it does when you carry it unexamined into an adult relationship. Because anxious attachment has a particularly devastating characteristic. The more you feed it, the further it takes you from what you're looking for. When you act from that place of need, when your actions are driven by the fear of losing, rather than by the genuine desire to give, what you produce in the other person is not closeness, but exhaustion, not attraction, but discomfort. And that discomfort, that retreat of the other, confirms exactly the fear that led you to act that way in the first place, creating a feedback loop that grows deeper with each cycle. This is first-rate psychology, and most men live trapped in that loop without even knowing it exists. Seneca wrote, "True happiness is to enjoy the present without anxious dependence on the future." When you are anxiously dependent on her approval, you cannot enjoy the present moment. You are always looking for signs, always analyzing, always worried. But when you can let go of that anxious dependence, you become free to be present. And presence is what creates real connection. Now, stop for a moment and ask yourself this question honestly. Not the one you think you should ask, the one you actually need to ask. How many of your actions in relationships are motivated by what you genuinely want to give, and how many are motivated by what you need to receive in order to feel secure? Because that distinction changes absolutely everything. A man who acts from genuine generosity, from the pleasure of giving without expectation of return, communicates something fundamentally different from a man who acts from the need to receive validation. The first transmits fullness. The second transmits emptiness. And the human brain perceives that difference with astonishing precision, even if it can't articulate it in words. This is where we need to talk about the concept that men most misunderstand when they first encounter these ideas: detachment. When detachment is discussed in the context of relationships, many interpret it as coldness, as artificial distance, as if it were about pretending not to care about something that actually matters deeply to you. And that is exactly the wrong interpretation. True detachment has nothing to do with feigning indifference. It has to do with something far deeper and far more difficult to achieve, having the capacity to love fully without your emotional well-being depending on the outcome. Think of it this way. Imagine two people who care for the same person with equal intensity. One of them can't sleep if they haven't received a reply within 2 hours. They constantly check their phone. They analyze every word they're told, looking for clues about what the other person really feels. They adjust their mood based on every small gesture the other makes. The other person also cares intensely for that same individual, but their day doesn't depend on what that person does or doesn't do. They have their own projects, their own interests, their own reasons for getting up in the morning that have nothing to do with what the other decides. And when they're with that person, they are completely present because they are not emotionally distant. They simply aren't desperate. Which of the two would you find it easier to love? Which one would you feel more curious about? Which one would generate more desire in you to get to know them? The answer is obvious, and yet most men behave exactly like the first while wishing to produce the effect generated by the second. Detachment is not practiced. It is not a technique. It is a consequence, a direct consequence of having a life rich enough and meaningful enough that no relationship, however wonderful, can be the only pillar on which your emotional equilibrium rests. Epictetus taught, It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. And when you are detached, you are reacting from strength. You are not letting her moods or her silence dictate your state. You are grounded in yourself, and that grounding is what makes her want to be close to you. And here we arrive at the core of everything we're going to discuss today. There is a concept in psychology known as locus of control. The psychologist Julian Rotter described it in the mid-20th century to refer to the degree to which a person believes the events of their life are under their own control or under the control of external forces. People with an internal locus of control believe their actions largely determine their outcomes. People with an external locus of control believe their circumstances depend fundamentally on external factors, luck, other people, fate. This concept is absolutely central to understanding the psychology of male attraction. A man with an internal locus of control lives from the inside out. His decisions arise from his values, his goals, what he considers right, not from what his environment expects of him. When he faces social pressure, he doesn't collapse or automatically adjust to avoid conflict, but evaluates the situation from his own judgment and acts accordingly. When he receives criticism, he doesn't take it as a verdict on his worth as a person, but as information he can accept or reject, depending on whether he considers it valid. This type of man transmits something that is magnetically attractive at the psychological level. The sense that he knows exactly who he is and that this knowledge is not up for negotiation. And it contrasts brutally with the man who lives from the outside in. The one whose self-esteem fluctuates based on the comments he receives, who adjusts his personality depending on the group he's in to maximize approval, who makes decisions based primarily on what others will think of him, who constantly needs external signals to know whether he's doing well or poorly, whether he's valuable or not, whether he's enough or he isn't. This second type of man can be an extraordinarily good person. He can be honest, caring, intelligent, faithful, but he transmits an underlying signal that undermines everything else. He doesn't trust himself. And if he doesn't trust himself, why would anyone else? Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts." When you cultivate thoughts of self-trust and internal control, your soul reflects that. And people will feel it. They will be drawn to it, not because you are trying to attract them, but because you are a source of stability in a world of chaos. Now, all of this might sound like abstract theory. So, let's bring it down to concrete ground. There is a pattern that repeats with almost mechanical regularity in the psychology of relationships, and that illustrates everything we've discussed so far perfectly. It's commonly known as the reverse pursuit effect. And although the name sounds like something out of a military strategy manual, the reality is that it operates in the most intimate dimension of human relationships. It works like this. When a man perceives he might lose something, his desire for that thing increases exponentially. When he feels he already has it secured, his desire tends to diminish. This is not an exclusively male characteristic. It is a human, psychological constant that operates in both directions. But men who don't understand how this mechanism works always make the same mistake. As soon as they perceive that someone might interest them, they deploy all their attention, all their availability, all their energy, trying to demonstrate how much they're worth. And in doing so, they eliminate precisely the element that keeps the other person's attraction system active, uncertainty. The human brain is designed to pay attention to what it doesn't fully understand, to pursue what it hasn't yet obtained, to find fascinating what is slightly unpredictable. When everything is completely clear, when there is nothing left to discover and no doubt left to resolve, curiosity switches off, and with curiosity, desire. This does not mean you should be an artificial mystery or play at making yourself seem interesting. It means something much simpler and much more powerful, that you need to have a real life with real projects and real priorities that is genuinely more important to you than any relationship in its early stages. That you're not available at every moment, not because you're pretending to be busy, but because you actually are. That your emotional energy is not focused on obtaining the other person's approval, but on building something with your own life that is worth building. That is not coldness. That is emotional maturity, and it is exactly what the human brain's attraction system perceives as irresistibly attractive. Seneca wrote, "It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste a lot of it. Don't waste your life trying to be what others want you to be. Build a life that is genuinely yours, and when you do, you will not need to chase anyone. They will come to you. Let's now talk about something few people are willing to admit out loud. Most men who complain about not getting what they want in relationships don't actually have a technique problem. They have a self-esteem problem. And when I say self-esteem, I'm not referring to that worn-out word that appears in cheap self-help books. I'm referring to something very specific, the ability to relate to your own worth independently of what others think of you. Real self-esteem is not arrogance. It's not thinking you're superior to anyone. It has nothing to do with looking down on others or pretending you don't need anyone. Real self-esteem is far more quiet and far more powerful than all of that. It is simply the ability to be in a room full of people without needing anyone to confirm that you have the right to be there. And that self-esteem, that internal security that doesn't depend on external validation, is built in only one way. Not with affirmations in front of the mirror. Not with quick confidence techniques. It is built by keeping promises, but not the promises you make to others, the promises you make to yourself. Every time you set out to do something and you do it, even when you don't feel like it, even when it's hard, even when no one is watching, you are building trust in yourself. Every time you set out to do something and don't follow through, even if it seems like a minor detail, you are eroding that trust in a silent but cumulative way. And the brain keeps track. Always. Over time, the man who consistently follows through on what he sets out to do, who keeps his commitments to himself, even when it's uncomfortable to do so, develops a relationship with his own word that translates into something perceptible from the outside with surprising clarity. That person doesn't need to convince anyone that they are trustworthy. The way they move through the world already communicates it. Epictetus taught, "No great thing is created suddenly." And the self-trust you build by keeping your promises is not created suddenly. It is built through the accumulation of small acts of integrity, each one reinforcing your relationship with yourself. And as you build that trust, you become more attractive, not because you are trying, but because you are becoming solid. This leads us directly to the concept of discipline. And here I want to be very precise, because discipline is perhaps the most misunderstood term of all those we're going to touch on today. Discipline is not self-punishment. It's not getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning because someone on the internet told you that's what winners do. It's not depriving yourself of everything you enjoy to prove you have willpower. Discipline, in its deepest and most useful sense, is simply the capacity to do what you decided you wanted to do, even when in that precise moment you don't feel like doing it. Why does this matter in the context of attraction and relationships? Because discipline builds exactly the kind of identity that generates natural attraction. A disciplined man has a project. He has direction. He has something he is working on, and that communicates something no conversational technique can simulate, that he has a life worth living. There is an experiment I find especially revealing for understanding this point. The psychologists Roy Baumeister and John Tierney, in their research on willpower, discovered that self-discipline is not so much a matter of suppression as of habit construction. People who seem to have exceptional willpower are not constantly fighting against their impulses. What they have done is structure their lives in such a way that the behaviors they want to maintain are the ones that require the least effort. They have automated what for others requires a constant battle. A man who has built that kind of structure in his own life is not only more effective, he is more attractive because he transmits a sense of internal control, of coherence between what he thinks, what he says, and what he does. That is profoundly reassuring to the nervous system of whoever is near him. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." When you build discipline, you are exercising that power. You are not letting your impulses control you. You are controlling them. And that control is what makes you attractive. Let's now talk about something that may be hard to hear, but that is absolutely necessary. Many men place at the center of their lives, sometimes without being aware of it, the pursuit of female approval. Not deliberately, not as a conscious strategy, but as a background motivation that colors all their decisions. They get dressed, thinking about how they'll be perceived. They develop conversation, hoping to impress. They choose their words, calculating the effect they'll have. Every action, to a greater or lesser extent, is oriented toward the same goal, to be liked. And the problem is not wanting to be liked. The problem is when wanting to be liked becomes the primary engine of your decisions. Because at that point, you have delegated control of your life to other people without them having asked for it and without you having consciously decided it. The man who has built a genuine identity with clear values, with his own projects, with a direction that makes sense to him regardless of what others think, doesn't need everyone to like him. And precisely because he doesn't need it, he becomes extraordinarily interesting to those around him. What I'm describing is not a pose. It's not something adopted to produce an effect. It is the natural result of a process of personal construction that requires time, honesty, and a healthy dose of voluntary discomfort. Seneca wrote, "True happiness is to enjoy the present without anxious dependence on the future. When you are not anxiously dependent on her approval, you can enjoy the present moment with her. You can be fully present, fully engaged, fully yourself. And that presence is what makes her want to be close to you. I need to tell you something about purpose and why it is the foundation of everything else. There is a fundamental difference between men who generate attraction naturally and those who have to constantly strive to achieve it. And that difference has nothing to do with physical appearance or innate charisma or any inborn quality. It has to do with the fact that the former have a purpose and the latter are looking for it in someone else's gaze. The purpose doesn't have to be grand. It doesn't have to be saving the world or building a multi-million-dollar company or becoming an elite athlete. The purpose can be mastering a craft with excellence. It can be building something meaningful in whatever field. It can be developing an artistic or intellectual discipline. It can be anything that requires sustained effort, generates real growth, and gives the man a reason for being that transcends the approval of his environment. What matters is not the content of the purpose. What matters is that it exists. Because a man with purpose has an internal orientation that others perceive, even when they don't know exactly what it is they're perceiving. There is something in the way he is present and how he listens without needing to speak, in the way he makes decisions without constantly needing to consult others' opinions, that communicates unmistakably this man knows where he's going. And that, at the most instinctive and most primitive level of the human brain, is profoundly attractive. Epictetus taught, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. When you have purpose, you react to life from a place of direction. You are not reactive to the whims of others. You are proactive in your own life. And that proactivity is what makes you magnetic." The question you're probably asking yourself right now is the most important of all. And how is that built? How does a man get from where he is now to that place you just described? The honest answer is that there is no shortcut. There is no three-step formula you can apply this week that will transform you into the man you want to be. Because what we are talking about is not changing surface behaviors. We are talking about changing the relationship you have with your own identity. And that requires time. It requires repetition. It requires failing and trying again with more information about yourself than you had the first time. But there is a starting point that is always the same. And that works because it is backed by decades of research in the psychology of behavioral change. It all starts with a single question that you have to ask yourself with all the honesty you can muster. What part of your life are you currently living that you know is in contradiction with the person you want to be? Because there, exactly there, is the first real work. Not in learning new techniques, not in changing how you present yourself to others, but in closing the gap between who you are today and who you know you could be if you stopped running from the discomfort that process implies. Self-respect is, ultimately, the source of everything else. Self-respect is not a feeling. It is not something that appears when you feel good. It is a practice that consists of treating yourself with the same rigor and the same care you would give to something you truly value. And that includes maintaining your boundaries when someone crosses them. It includes saying no when your honest answer is no, even if that makes the other person uncomfortable. It includes prioritizing your own well-being without feeling guilty about it. Because a man who doesn't know how to say no is a man who cannot say yes in a genuine way. Everything he does is tinged by the fear of rejection. And the fear of rejection is, paradoxically, the clearest signal you can emit that you are rejecting yourself before anyone else does. Marcus Aurelius wrote, The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. When you cultivate thoughts of self-respect and self-worth, your soul reflects that, and women will see it. They will feel it, and they will be drawn to it. I want you to think about the man you are in the moments when nobody is watching, when there is no one to impress, when there is no performance to sustain. What kind of conversation do you have with yourself? How do you treat yourself when you make a mistake? What kind of thoughts fill the silences? Because that man, the one you are in private, is the real man. The one who presents himself to others is a more or less edited version of him. And no matter how skilled you are at editing that version, people perceive the original. Not consciously, not in clear words, but they perceive it. And they perceive it because human beings have spent millions of years learning to read social signals with extraordinary precision. We are deeply social animals, and our brains have evolved to detect inconsistencies between what someone says and what they actually are. That detection occurs in milliseconds, long before we can articulate it rationally, and it generates a sensation we can't describe, but that is perfectly clear. Something doesn't add up. When there is coherence between who you are in private and who you are in public, when what you project is simply the natural expression of something that truly exists, that sense of incoherence disappears, and in its place something completely different appears: trust. A trust that doesn't have to be asserted or demonstrated because it is perceived directly. That is what generates genuine attraction. Not the right words, not studied gestures, but the internal coherence of someone who is what they appear to be. Seneca wrote, "It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste a lot of it." Don't waste your life trying to be someone you're not. Build the internal coherence that comes from being who you truly are. And when you do, you will become someone who cannot be ignored. I'm going to leave you with something I consider the core of everything we've discussed today, the point to which absolutely everything else converges, and which summarizes in a few words what separates the men who attract naturally from those who pursue attraction desperately and never quite reach it. Attraction is not sought, it becomes a consequence. When a man decides to concentrate his energy on building something real with his own life, on developing genuine discipline, on having clear purpose, on respecting his own limits, on treating his own word as something sacred, on no longer basing his emotional well-being on external validation, something begins to happen that cannot be planned or simulated. The way he moves changes. The way he speaks changes. The way he occupies the space around him changes. And all of that communicates without him having to do anything specific to communicate it, exactly the signals that the human brain's attraction system is instinctively searching for. Not because he learned a technique, but because he has become someone genuinely different. That is the work. It is long. Sometimes it is solitary. There are moments when it seems like you're not making progress, when the effort doesn't produce the results you expected as quickly as you expected them, but it is the only path that leads to a real place, because everything else, all the superficial strategies, all the power games, all the seduction techniques that promise quick results, are patches on a structure that remains the same. And sooner or later, the structure always ends up showing through. What I'm proposing to you is not to impress anyone. It is to become genuinely and without rushing the kind of man who doesn't need to impress anyone. And if you've made it to here, something tells me you already know exactly what kind of work we're talking about. And that part of you has been waiting a long time for someone to say it without embellishment or empty promises. Now, the decision is yours. It always was. If you made it to the end of this video, comment, "I made it," and I'll personally reply to you myself. And if this resonated with you, subscribe to be part of this and hit like if you enjoyed it.